I have discovered in the study of this that there is also a method to the madness, as I will call it. They're linked, not only are they standalone, but they also link together to do something very interesting. One thing that I want us to understand is that this book could very adequately have been named parables. It's the same word. Proverb and parable mean the same thing by definition. They're the same Hebrew word. Now, with that being said, so what is a parable? Yeshua, when we think parable, we think of Yeshua's teachings, parables. Yes, I got it. So what is a parable? Defined easily is simply this. It's a simple story to illustrate a moral lesson or to teach us a spiritual truth. It's often referred to as I've commonly heard it described, is that a parable is an earthly story to teach you a spiritual truth. That parable may or may not be true in its action. The story told about there was a man who went here and fell, like the story of the Good Samaritan, doesn't mean that event literally took place, but rather it is could be a fictional story that still nevertheless produces a spiritual reality. One thing that we need, and I know that Jeremy mentioned this, and I'm going to confirm it again because I was raised totally backwards to what I'm about to say, is I was taught my whole life, and many of you may be like, I may see your heads nod, it's like I was always taught that the book of Proverbs was this grand list of promises from God. I gleaned upon that. Train a child in the way that he should go. So when he's old, he will not depart from it. But yet it appears that we can do the very best of our ability, and it seems like sometimes they go astray. So therefore, is the promise of God false? Is it or is it not a promise from God that if we train a child in the way that they should go, we can come to a couple conclusions. One is that we really didn't train them in the way that we should have. Therefore, we can't claim the promise. Or if we did do the best we have, and we've done the very best with the ability that God gave us to teach them the ways of righteousness, but yet they went astray, then we would have to declare that God's promise did not hold true. We need to understand that the book of Proverbs is not a book of promises. The book of Proverbs is a book of parables. Simple stories, simple statements to teach us a spiritual truth. And again, and I will confirm that they are sufficient to stand alone. But I've come to also realize that you can gain a greater sense or a deeper depth, if you will, when these parables are stitched together. They create a bigger picture. They create a bigger picture that teaches something more in depth. When you think about this, think about the word proverb, swap it for the word parable. And when you think about parable and you think about Yeshua's parables, Yeshua told many, many parables in many different ways that taught one spiritual truth. The parable of the fish and the net, the parable of the wheat and the tares, the parable of the separation of the sheep and the goats. They are all teaching one climactic truth. That in the end, God will separate His elect or His people from sinners. All those stories are varying in their context, but all pointing to a central message. I want to share with you, I want to read with you, if you'll follow along with me, for the 13th chapter of Proverbs. And I'm going to read it from start to finish, if you'll follow along with me. And I think I've got it up here. Well, I don't know if you can see it, probably not. Nope, it didn't come out good, but I'm going to read it anyway, so follow along with me. And I'm reading you from the King James translation, not because I believe it's the one that's absolutely infallible correct, but because it makes for a good platform to teach from, especially with Strong's links to words. But I want to share with you, listen, follow along. A wise son heareth his father's instruction, but a scorner heareth not rebuke. A man shall eat good by the fruit of his mouth, but the soul of the transgressors shall eat violence. He that keepeth his mouth keepeth his life, but he that openeth wide his lips shall have destruction. The soul of the sluggard desireth, and hath nothing, but the soul of the diligent shall be made fat. A righteous man hateth lying, but a wicked man is loathsome and cometh to shame. Righteousness keepeth him that is upright in the way, but wickedness overthroweth the sinner. Verse 7, there is that maketh himself rich, yet hath nothing. There is that maketh himself poor, yet hath great riches. The ransom of a man's life are his riches, but the poor heareth not rebuke. The light of the righteous rejoiceth, but the lamp of the wicked shall be put out. Only by pride cometh contention, but with the well advised is wisdom. Wealth gotten by vanity shall be diminished, but he that gathereth by labor shall increase. Hope deferred maketh the heart sick, but when the desire cometh, it is a tree of life. Whoso despiseth the word shall be destroyed, but he that feareth the commandment shall be rewarded. Verse 14, the law of the wise is a fountain of life, to depart from the snares of death. Good understanding giveth favor, but the way of transgressors is hard. Every prudent man dealeth with knowledge, but a fool layeth open his folly. A wicked messenger falleth into mischief, but a faithful ambassador is health. Poverty and shame shall be to him that refuseth instruction, but he that regardeth reproof shall be honored. The desire accomplished is sweet to the soul, but it is abomination to fools to depart from evil. He that walketh with wise men shall be wise, but a companion of fools shall be destroyed. Evil pursueth sinners, but to the righteous good shall be repaid. A good man leaveth an inheritance to his children, and the wealth of sinners is laid up for the just. Much food is in the tillage of the poor, but there is that is destroyed for want of judgment. He that spareth his rod hateth his son, but he that loveth him chasteneth him in betimes. The righteous eateth of the satisfying of the soul, but the belly of the wicked shall want. What would you suppose if I told you that not just one verse, but if every verse in this entire chapter is teaching one central truth? That sounds insane. We heard all these appearances of random statements of these parables or proverbs, if you will, that seem to be teaching all kinds of different things, talking about wealth that's gained through dishonesty. We're hearing about desiring things and wealth and being poor and all these different things. And some of it's really veiled when it comes to the King James language, and that's why I kind of chose that translation. But I want to walk through a couple of these verses to start with, and I can tell by the sake of time I'm not going to get very far. So I will go as far as I can. I want to lay the foundation to hopefully help you to either remove the spectacles of understanding that you currently wear, or to help you put on new ones to help you see these parables in a different way. I want to start with verse 1. And I'm going to see here. I'm going to clear the screen so it doesn't disturb. But in verse 1, in the King James reads, a wise son heareth his father. Now, but I'm going to go ahead and do something I wasn't prepared to, but I'm going to preface something to you. I'm going to give you the bookends of this chapter of Proverbs, okay? I want you to listen to the first two verses of chapter 13, and then I want you to listen back to the last two verses of this chapter. All right, here we go. Proverbs 13, verse 1 and 2 reads, a wise son heareth his father's instruction, but a scorner heareth not rebuke. A man shall eat good by the fruit of his mouth, but the soul of the transgressors shall eat violence. Followed by the last two verses. He that spareth his rod hateth his son, but he that loveth him chasteneth him betimes. The righteous eat to the satisfying of his soul, but the belly of the wicked shall want. Can you kind of hear the connection between those? Something very interesting here as we go back to verse 1. We're going to talk about a couple of these words. The first word we see is the word wise, which is Hebrew word 2450, which is called calm, which means intelligent, skillful, artful, prudent, or crafty in its good sense. It can also refer to cunning, but which can be in a negative light, but here is a positive sense. It says that a wise or an intelligent, skillful, artful, prudent, or crafty son, which is the next word we see, which is the Hebrew word ben. We see as Hebrew word 1121, which is the word ben, which is a masculine noun. But it's also used 1,568 times in the King James Bible. This word is translated as children, not just son. So, daughters, you're not out on this one. When you think of Hebrew thought, if you have 999 women in a room and you have one male, the usage of the word, the noun that's used, will be masculine. If there's 1 in 999 males to females. So it's a masculine noun. So in other words, the word is simply children. The next one here says, heareth his father's instruction. That word heareth here is Hebrew word 8085, which I want to just clarify. The verse reads that a wise son heareth his father's instruction. If you have a King James Bible you're looking at, you may notice something interesting about the word heareth is italicized. The word italicized in the King James Bible means that it's not in the manuscript text. So that word has been imputed into the manuscript text. However, I want to share with you, it was put, so why was it put there? It's to try to bring clarity of comprehension, because though the word heareth, Hebrew word 8085, is missing in the first appearance of the manuscripts, it is genuine in the second. And it means not just the faculty of hearing sounds. In other words, when I say, can you hear me? Doesn't mean do you hear the sounds that are coming out of my voice in the faculty of hearing. While it can mean that you heard a sound, but here rather the meaning here is rather that you understand, or that you would yield, or you obey. In other words, a wise son listens to. We often say it a different way. We talk to our children and we say, I know you can hear me, but are you listening? And that's another way to put it. So, not whether or not you can hear me, but they listen. In other words, they take heed to, they take it to heart, they operate or they act upon their father's instruction. That word instruction is musar, which just means, that word actually means a chastening or correction. So it doesn't just mean, son, let me show you how to do this, but this has to do with a corrective side in nature. And then we got a word that we're looking at in the King James, the word scorner. It's interesting that this word scorner, Hebrew word lutz, which is Hebrew word 3887, is used 27 times in the King James translation. It's translated 18 times as the word scorner. 2 times it's translated as the word interpreter. 1 time as the word ambassador. And 1 time as teacher. Interesting. And what it literally means, it means to mouth at or to speak arrogantly. It means to scoff or to express contempt. But one who speaks arrogantly does not listen to rebuke. One who mouths at or speaks arrogantly or scoffs or expresses contempt does not listen to rebuke, which the Hebrew 1606, which is ge'ora, which means reproof or a chiding, which is the word chiding is another way of saying scolding. Verbal correction, if you will. And I want to share with you this particular verse in another translation. We're still in verse 1. And this is the way the Apostolic Bible Polyglot, which is a interlinear translation from the Greek Old Testament, which reads this way: an astute son is subject to his father, but an unhearing son goes into destruction. Reads very differently. So in other words, one who will listen to correction, this is a good thing. We've talked about this. Jeremy has brought it up many, many times and done a great job helping you understand that we're talking about, in the book of Proverbs, the contrast here. We have this versus this, the contrast between, and it has to do with wisdom versus foolishness. Righteousness versus wickedness. So one who will not listen to correction or instruction or discipline leads to destruction. We see in Proverbs 1, verse 7. Says, the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Psalm 1:1 reads this way: blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly. Remember that word. Nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. Same word. So we have here one who hears. The admonition here is to hear, to perceive, to understand, to listen, to yield, and to obey to godly wisdom. In verse 2, we read a man. It's very interesting because it seems like there's a total break in thought, let's be honest, because when you read that and you're like, if I say all that's put together, you're like, what? We get a word, first thing comes out of the proverb, in Proverbs 13:1 is a wise son hears his father's instruction, but a scorner does not hear rebuke, won't listen to rebuke. And then it's like a total random thought. It says, a man shall eat good by the fruit of his mouth, but the soul of transgressors shall eat violence. And what I'm here to tell you is those two verses are connected. How? Here's how. If we look at Proverbs 13 as the chapter of food for the soul, then here's how. I want to share with you, first of all, that a man shall eat good by the fruit of his mouth, but the soul of the transgressor shall eat violence. I want to share with you another translation. I'm going to give you the Septuagint again, which says, by the way, I want to clarify that the Arabic manuscript and the Septuagint, what's called the LXX, actually the phrase of the mouth that we just read about here, which says, a man shall eat by the fruit of his mouth, is not found that's found in certain manuscripts, but in the Septuagint and then the Arabic, it's not found. The phrase of the or of his mouth is missing. And the way it reads from the Septuagint reads, from fruits of righteousness, the good shall eat, but the lives of lawbreakers will be destroyed unseasonably. We get this, when you first read this surface level on verse 2, says, a man shall eat good by the fruit of his mouth. That's a really abstract statement. What does it mean that a man will eat good by the fruit of his mouth? Does that mean I'm going to eat good by the fruit that comes out of my mouth? Does that mean if I'm a smooth talker that it's going to help me gain a leg up in this world and allow me to eat well? What is it we're trying to understand here? But if we remove the idea of a man will, and the question is his. Let's just suppose that it's genuine here. A man will eat good by the fruit of his mouth. The question is, who is the his? Who is the he? Whose mouth are we talking about? What if it's intricately connected to the verse above it? The wise instruction from the Father. A man will eat good fruit, or he shall eat well of the fruit that proceeds out of his Father's instruction. Making a little more sense? The way it reads? I want to share with you the New English translation of that particular verse that does a pretty good job. It says, from the fruit of his speech a person eats good things, but the faithless desire the fruit of violence. I want to share with you a statement in John Gill in his commentary when he says, the Septuagint and the Arabic versions render it shall eat of the fruits of righteousness. I should choose to translate the whole thus, a good man shall eat of the fruits of his mouth. So Ibn Ezra interprets, a good man shall eat. And so the Septuagint, Syriac, and Arabic versions render it. The sense is that a good man brings forth good things out of the good treasures of his heart by the mouth, which not only minister grace to the hearers and are for the use of edifying to others, but also to himself, while he gives wholesome counsel and advice to others. So the statement is true that there will be those who will eat well from the fruit of your mouth if it is indeed good fruit. As well as a man shall eat well by listening to the good fruit that proceeds out of the Father's instruction that he should heed to. We've got a couple more minutes, we'll continue through verse 3. Verse 3 reads this way, he that keepeth his mouth keepeth his life, but he that openeth wide his lips shall have destruction. In other words, we've heard about, in the very first verse, we've heard about a man who will hear his father's instructions versus one who scorns at his father's instructions. What happens when you scorn something? Your mouth utters things. And he who keepeth his mouth preserves his life. The idea is still along the lines of listening to instruction rather than mouthing scorn. So the one who keepeth his mouth here is not a scorner, if you will. The Lexham English Bible translate, he who keeps his mouth guards his life, but he who opens his lips, ruin belongs to him. We read in Psalm 141, verse 3, set a guard, O Yahweh, over my mouth. Keep watch over the doors of my lips. James chapter 3, verse 5 and 6. So also the tongue is a small member of the body, and boasts great things. Behold, how small a fire sets ablaze, how great of a forest. And the tongue is a fire, the world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, defiling the whole body and setting on fire the course of the human existence, being set on fire by hell. The admonition to keep our mouth is a way that's preserving and beneficial to us. Keeping our mouth doesn't mean that we should never speak. It's meaning that we should give ear to good counsel, to wise instruction. In verse 4, and I want to try to get here and I'll stop. The soul of the sluggard desireth and hath nothing, but the soul of the diligent shall be made fat. Now, how do we just transition from listening to good instruction to don't be lazy and work hard? As we talked about literalism and letterism, getting hung up on the words on the page at surface value and not looking for the depths contained within them is a major problem. What if I tell you this verse is also connected to the three previous? Because there's a parable here. There's a sluggard. What is this sluggard? Is this a lazy man who won't get out of bed, who won't work? Because it says a sluggard desireth. Desireth what? He's hungry? What is the problem with this man? Let me offer you another way to see this verse. The sluggard who is wanting or desireth, the word means to want or to need or to desire, to long for something, represents those too lazy to seek after God's righteousness. Just like a man that's too lazy to work goes hungry. The diligent, or the one who is made fat, is satisfied or made full by feeding upon God's Word. I want to share with you some more notes from Brother John Gill. Listen very carefully. John Gill says, the soul of the sluggard desireth and hath nothing. He desires knowledge, but does not care to be at any pains to get it, and so has it not. He desires riches, but chooses not to make the use of the means, to be diligent and industrious, and so he is without them. He desires to wear good clothes and rich garment, but is unwilling to labor for them, and therefore is clothed with rags. He desires food and plenty of it, but refuses to work for it. And he that will not work should not eat, and therefore he has it not, but starves and famishes. And in spiritual things the sluggard desires heaven and happiness, but does not care to do the duties of religion. He would die the death of the righteous, but is unwilling to live his life to abstain from sin and to live soberly and righteously is too hard of a service for him, and he does not choose to do it or suffer anything for the cause of Christ and true religion. But the soul of the diligent shall become fat, became rich, increase in temporal things, and have great plenty and prosperity. And so in spiritual matters, such ones are diligent to use the means, constantly attend to on the word and the ordinances and the labor of the meat, in which endures to everlasting life. Such are filled and satisfied as with marrow and fatness, and become fat and flourishing in the fruitful and fruitful in every good word and work. We have a concept that's beginning to develop. One who hears his father's instruction or obeys, listens, and attends to and yields in obedience to the father's instruction. The ideology here, of course, is ultimately it's between our relationship between us and our Heavenly Father. But on an earthly level, it's between us and our earthly father, giving that you have a wise earthly father. But teaches us that if we will yield to the instruction, the wise instruction of our Father, that it will go well for us in the long run. What is the instruction? Is likened unto the wisdom of God, in which we should not be sluggards. We should be diligent, doers of the word, seekers of His truth, always. The sluggard here is not the man who's too lazy to get out of bed and go to work. While it is true that a sluggard who won't work has trouble finding enough provision to eat. But rather, in the spiritual sense, the sluggard here is the one who is too lazy to invest into the diligent search of God's Word to look for His truth, to look for wisdom and insight that's contained in it. And those who do are satisfied, and they become rich. And this is where the rubber meets the road. Guys, we know this to be true. And I'll close out quickly with this. And I only get to 4 verses in 40 minutes. But it's important. I feel like that this chapter is very important to help us understand all the way down to the very end where it talks about he who spares the rod spoils the child, as we often render it. Or he who spares the rod hateth his son. And what does that really mean? It means what it says what it means, but there's also another level there that we need to understand as we walk through this chapter verse by verse. But here's the deal. Guys, we're all often like to point that finger back at the place that we used to be, of those who are still there, who go, you just eat whatever your pastor says. You don't study for yourself. You just listen to it and you eat it hook, line, and sinker, never questioning anything. But if they would just take the time to look at the Word themselves and study for themselves, they would see the error of their ways. I'm here to tell you, where there's people, there's problems. Because people by nature are lazy. And the infection is just as prevalent in the walk that we claim to be in, this whole Bible-believing truth. There are people who claim to search for the truth, and they search for this, when really all they're doing is they're trading their allegiances to who they listen to. They're just following, hook, line, and sinker, following along these random, crazy ideologies and these different doctrines that are coming out of this, whatever you call Torah, whatever you call Hebrew roots movement that's moving so prevalent along, and you find people that are going way off in left field here and right field there and getting strung along with these strange ordinances and doctrines and belief systems, and really they've not really done what this scripture tells us to do. They have still practiced the occupation of the sluggard. They're just letting somebody else do the labor. And they're being led astray nonetheless. We are to be diligent. You are responsible for your faith. It's not a solo walk. We need each other. Because nobody in this room or nobody on the face of this earth has been gifted with all divine wisdom and all understanding in all points of practice and faith of religion. There's nobody that has that. Yahweh may gift you in some aspect, some form or fashion, and then He gifts another one in another direction. And when you understand the Scriptures correctly, you two come together, create, and begin to build that house. We need one another. We need accountability to one another. We're not a one-shot wonder. And we need each other. We need to be able to hear and listen to wise counsel from our brothers and sisters who can help and guide us and give us instructions in righteousness. Children, listen to your fathers and your mothers. Yield to them as they try to impute righteousness. And I'm going to tell you, there's sometimes that I come down hard on my boys, and because they're my oldest ones, and a lot of times I try not to get frustrated in the things that they do. It's because I lived a life, and the Bible tells us to seek after godly wisdom, and we're trying to impute that into them. And I read a little meme one time. It said wisdom comes from experience, and experience comes from making a lot of wrong decisions. And when we've lived a life, if you could only take, how many of you that could take back and go back in time, and if you only knew then what you feel like you understand now, how much different would your life be? Would you make some of the same mistakes you made when you were younger? And we try to pour into our children and say, don't make the mistake I made. Don't do what I did. Don't do this. We have some wisdom. And this is our Heavenly Father saying, don't do this. Don't do that. It's not good for you. Don't eat that. It'll kill you. Don't practice this. It'll lead you astray. Don't be sucked into every wind of doctrine, but be diligent to test all things, study, and to hold on to that which is true. But yet we want to practice, and we want to be a sluggard. We want to be lazy in our faith. But we are responsible for our own faith. Sometimes it's frustrating. I know that anybody who stands and tries to teach or lead from the Word of God will tell you that sometimes it's disheartening when it seems like they pour their heart and soul, and it's almost like it falls on deaf ears at times. And it's disheartening. One tries to practice, tries to do the best that he can, leading by an exemplary way. But it seems like it just doesn't take effect. It doesn't sink in sometimes. And we always got to remember that ultimately on Judgment Day, when I stand before my Creator and my Messiah, the reality is I'm going to answer for what I did, not what you do. In my position, I'll be responsible for what I proclaimed, what I taught, not what you did with it. Wise counsel, he that keepeth his mouth. We could point another finger there and say we should be careful about the way we use our mouth. Everything that we do and everything we say as we lead others should be seasoned with grace, spoken in love. It's not our responsibility to go out on the streets and try to beat people over the head with the Bible. I'm telling you right now, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I would a whole lot rather been a mercenary for God as I would have been a preacher of the Word. That was just in my nature. If beating you over the head with the Bible worked, I'd have been just as happy to strap a Bible to a Louisville Slugger to drive-by from here to Marietta. It doesn't work. Beating them over the head doesn't work. Living a life of example, following the instructions is effectual. Let us be diligent as we close out with this, and I want to encourage you to hang in there. I'm going to try to take and walk through this chapter. And some of these will be quick as they're repetitive and we can go through. But as we begin to paint this picture and to reprogram your mind as a different way to look at this verbiage. When we look at it, instead of going, the lazy man, he won't eat. But going, who is that sluggard? What does that mean to me? What does it mean that a righteous man hates lying, but a wicked man is loathsome and comes to shame? What does it mean when it says righteousness keepeth him that is upright in the way, but wickedness overthrows the sinner? What does that mean, and how does it relate to my diligent inspection and search of the truth contained in Yahweh's Word? And hopefully as we walk through this, maybe there's something, if there's one thing that you can take home with you, I pray that you will. And listen to it and help us understand that this entire chapter is stitched together, teaching us a climactic theme about what it means that it's beneficial that we search for food for the soul, that will satisfy us. And that food is, man shall not live by bread alone, but every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. That is the only thing that satisfies your soul. And it is our responsibility individually, as well as collectively, to come together as iron sharpens iron, so does a man sharpen the countenance of his friend. Is that we need to be accountable to one another, study and be diligent, study together, and be in community with each other, researching the Word and searching for the truth. Not looking necessarily only at the letters on the page, but trying to understand what is Yahweh trying to literally teach us. We can look at it surface level and grab some Proverbs and absolutely glean, don't get me wrong, and they do stand alone. But they also stitch together in a parallelism, and they stitch together and they teach a greater understanding, a greater vision, a greater depth of what the Word is trying to say to us. And I pray, and I'll close that because, like I said, I want to continue because there's so much that goes on as we're just now beginning to get into the meat of the matter. But I want to ask you over the next week, look diligently at chapter 13. Try to look at it in the lens that I just gave you to look at these texts through. And ask yourself, how does this relate to seeking righteousness is wisdom? Being lazy leads to destruction. Seeking after righteousness fulfills you, but lacking to do so will leave you hungry. And think about that over the next week.